With the upcoming Mega Evolution set now fully released overseas, everyone's talking about one Pokemon, Shuckle, the brand new anti-Munkidori with the ability to heal 30 damage off of any Pokemon once per turn. And last week when I spun the wheel to decide what Pokemon to feature in a deck, it landed on Shuckle. But with that upcoming Shuckle not yet released, I had to default to the Shuckle card that is currently available to use. But I'm sure just like the Mega Evolutions card, this Shuckle card from Obsidian Flames is gonna be equally meta-changing, right? Oh no. Alright folks, welcome back to the 825 deck challenge, where I have to work overtime today to try and make this card a meta champion as opposed to a Veluza loser. So what does Shuckle do? Well, Shuckle is a basic grass Pokemon who has Berry Scent, a colorless energy attack that lets me search my deck for a basic Pokemon and place it on my bench. Then Guard Press is a 2 colorless energy attack that does 30 damage, and on the next turn will mitigate 30 damage that comes in at Shuckle. But at 80 HP, even with that mitigation, there's a strong chance Shuckle gets blasted into the ground. And Shuckle doesn't evolve or do really anything else. Attached to the number 30, because that's how much damage Shuckle the Destroyer can do, my main attacker would be Tsareena EX, whose Icicle Soul attack brings the selected opponent's Pokemon down to a mere 30 HP. Then at secondary attack, Trap Kick does 180 damage, heals from conditions, and heals 30. And so my play would be to get Tsareena EX out to spread as much damage around on the opponent's side as possible to set up for multi-prize turns. To ensure damage stayed where I wanted it, I equipped 2 Munkidoris who, using their Adrenabrain ability, would be able to send 30 damage from one of my Pokemon back over to one of my opponents. Then to deal that remaining 30 damage, I also ran Ting-Lu, who is so underrated in the current format. Ting-Lu's Ground Smasher is a single fighting energy attack that does 30 damage to the active Pokemon, and then, if there's a stadium in play, does 30 damage to all opponents' Pokemon on the bench and discards the stadium. With Tsareena spreading the perfect amount of damage initially, a well-timed Ground Smasher attack could take 6 prizes at once. Of course, if that didn't work, I could always throw out Shuckle, who'd be able to take out at least one of the Pokemon with 30 HP remaining. I ran a Fez for draw support as well as a couple Uxies to just get the damage spread going either in early or late game, as Uxie puts 2 damage counters on each of my opponent's Pokemon. Then this deck was loaded with trainer cards to try and get Tsareena up and ready as soon as possible. I went with Precious Trolley as my ace spec. This card allows you to fill up your bench with basic Pokemon from your deck. It's a great early game way to establish your bench. I also included TM Evo, Hilda, Tera Orbs, some Rare Candies, and Arven, all to try and build up Tsareena EX as quickly as possible. With the remaining space in the deck, I also took a look at stadiums, as Ting-Lu's Ground Smasher would need a stadium in play to be effective. I went with a wide variety, as well as Colress's Tenacity to be able to use specific stadiums when needed. One particular stadium I was excited to have in this deck was Gravity Mountain, which decreases stage 2 Pokemon HP by 30. So if I could use Tsareena EX to leave only 30 HP remaining on a stage 2 Pokemon, and then that damage sticks, on my next turn I could knock out that stage 2 Pokemon by just putting down a stadium. And I put a single Briar in. This guy is so wacky. I hate when he's used against me, but here he could be a get out of jail free card in the endgame. If my opponent has 2 prizes remaining, I can use Briar, and if I get a knockout using damage from a Tera Pokemon, which Tsareena EX is, on that turn, I can take an extra prize card. I included my other grab bag trainers, Iono for hand disruption, and to help with bricking, and Counter Catcher to help with gust up. Setting up multi-prizes, I anticipated being behind on prizes, so felt the Counter Catchers made a lot of sense here. And with some energy, including 4 Prism Energies to power up Uxie and Munkidori, it was time to Shuckle it up and give this deck some test rides. In my first match, I was going second, and with Uxie inactive, used my opponent's Artazon to get a Bounsweet down, and then would put my Town Store down to allow me to choose a tool card for my deck. Since I didn't have any Psychic Energy in my hand for Uxie to actually attack, using TM Evo here made a lot of sense, until I realized I didn't have any Steenees in my deck to actually evolve Bounsweet. And would you look at that, my opponent had already gotten Charizard EX active and swinging by their 3rd turn. I feel like the question I should be asking myself every time I build a deck is, how will I fare when turn 3 Charizard comes into play? And in this case, the deck would be crumbling fast. as I still needed 2 turns on my end to get Tsareena EX into play, so I threw Ting-Lu into active as a sacrifice, evolved, passed, and watched Ting-Lu get taken down. But next turn, Tsareena EX was coming into play, and things were maybe about to change. Using Icicle Soul, I placed 300 damage onto the opposing Charizard, a bit wary of the Munkidori staring me down on the other side. I waited for my opponent to go, and perhaps they were frozen by my Icicle because their turn timed out, and it was passed back to me, giving me the exact opening I needed. With my Tsareena EX still full HP, I used its second attack to finish the blow on Charizard and get me my first prizes, while beginning to build towards a Ting-Lu and a secondary Tsareena EX on my backline. My opponent was back and better than ever, sort of, as they evolved up another Charizard, but hilariously, and I love when this happens, it's so much karma for Charizard players, didn't have the free energy in their deck necessary to allow Charizard to attack, so it was back to me again. I continued building up my backline and then decided to use Trop Kick again to do 180 damage to the active Charizard, because this way, even if it could attack on the next turn, I'd be able to return for the KO on my next turn anyway and heal. And so I took out their Charizard, and they were able to get the energy they needed to, and then return a hit on me. And then, with each of us having 2 prizes remaining, I sort of floundered. They had Iono'd last turn, leaving me with just a couple of cards, but I was able to draw into Fezandipiti, giving me additional 3 cards to work with. I was in a tricky spot, and really just floundered under the pressure of the TCG Live countdown timer. I'm not sure if there was actually a real win condition for me here, so I just Arven'd, didn't really find much, and ended up just kind of sitting there without any energy to attack, leaving my opponent able to boss up the Fezandipiti and win. I made a couple of quick modifications to my deck, including dropping the Professor Turo that was in there and adding a Budew, and I went into another matchup, which started alright with Ting-Lu in active just doing some damage onto Iron Hands, but Yanmega EX came in swiftly and quickly via Prime Catcher, putting the Steenee that I was hoping to evolve up on the next turn into active and getting taken out. Seeing the now charged up Iron Hands that was about to come into active next turn, and my low damage hitters on my bench, I wasn't feeling optimistic, so conceded and went on to the next. 2 losses in testing, and well, I realized what I was missing. This was a Shuckle deck, but where was the Shuckle? Where was our boy, the Meta Slayer? And so, with Precious Trolley in my hand to start the next match, along with some Air Balloons to retreat out the active Bounsweet, Shuckle went into active to tank some damage while I got everything else set up. It wouldn't matter though, because my opponent, who rightfully feared Shuckle, would concede. Because of the concedes both on my side and my opponent's, I went in to do one more testing match, and this time, with Shuckle starting in active, I knew it was going to be a good one. My opponent would be running the new Electric Box type deck, and after I do a bunch of Tool and Energy attaching on my first turn, my opponent would get Zekrom into active to do 50 damage to my Shuckle. So Zekrom was a funny matchup here, because while they have an attack that does 50 damage, the real threat was Voltage Burst, which does 130 damage and then an additional 50 damage for each prize card I've taken. But then it also does 30 damage to itself. And keep that 30 damage in mind, because I'd use my turn to TM Evo and Precious Trolley my bench, so on my next turn, after Shuckle would be knocked out, I put the Steenee into active and evolve it up into a Tsareena EX who'd be able to place 200 HP's worth of damage counters onto the Zekrom, leaving him with just a mere 30 HP. Zekrom would retreat on their turn, giving me some cannon fodder in Tinamo. Due to the electric weakness to ground, I opted to bring Ting-Lu up, because I'd both get the knockout on Tinamo given to me, but even better would put my opponent in a bit of an awkward spot. Unless they got any other Pokemon down on their next turn, they'd have very limited options. They brought Zekrom up, and with the energy needed, they were able to Voltage Burst on my bossed up Munkidori for the knockout, but because of the 30 damage it does to itself, knocked itself out in the process, putting me up 2 more prizes and leaving alone 60 HP Watchroll in play for my Ting-Lu to one-shot due to weakness, until I realized Watchroll is resistant to fighting type, so the opposite of what I thought was going to happen. I'd actually be doing 0 damage to Watchroll, which allowed my opponent a second chance in a way, but due to the energy deficit, I wasn't really pressured down. I was able to place damage using Tsareena onto a bench Zeraora and Zekrom, only for Ting-Lu to finish the job and get me the win. Alright, so it was clear. Shuckle in active to start was the secret sauce, but was the sauce sweet enough and special enough to make this deck a meta champion? It was time to find out. In the final match, I had a fantastic starting hand with 2 Bounsweets and Precious Trolley. I was ready to get things going, but I'd be going against one of the most dominating decks at the moment, Gholdengo EX. Instead of throwing Shuckle into active, I decided I'd try to slow things down using Budew, but because I'd gone first, my opponent, having items for even their first turn, was able to get a massive head start, and further, Genesect EX does not care about Budew. On my turn, I drew into an energy which I was able to place, but with a full bench, there wasn't much else for me to do, aside from going in for the itchy pollen. To no surprise, my opponent put down 3 Gholdengo EXs, giving them quite the draw engine, and then was easily able to dispense in my Budew, as it only took a single energy to discard. Next up was Shuckle, as I still needed to buy some time to evolve up my Bounsweets. Still drawing into nothing, I was getting nervous. What I really needed was a supporter, and they were all being shy. With my opponent bossing up one of my Munkidoris, they took a second prize card. My turn, still nothing of use. I benched another Bounsweet and placed another energy. Meanwhile, my opponent now had 18 cards in their hands. Insanity. With them getting their third knockout on me, I drew into an Iono, and it was my last chance at hope. The Iono, of course, would give me 6 fresh cards, and give my opponent only 3. Not that it would really matter, as they would inevitably coin bonus their way to another 100 cards come their next turn. Still, I got a few helpful pieces and opted to, for my first time since my itchy pollen, put a little bit of damage out on the board, which I knew would probably get thrown back my way by the benched Munkidori, but at this point, I really had nothing to lose. They responded with a swift takedown on my Ting-Lu, and it was pretty much as over as it could be, but clawing at the ground as Shuckle was on his way to become a Veluza loser, I Arven for a counter catcher to force the Genesect into active, thinking it might buy me an additional turn, but the Air Balloon sealed the deal, leading to the final prizes necessary to call it a game. Shuckle, my boy, my son. Honestly, bricking happens, and this deck didn't have a fantastic draw engine, but just relied on drawing into a tool or two necessary to get the deck going. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any of the cards I needed, and Gholdengo didn't give us a moment to breathe. Shuckle, you are a Veluza loser. Alright, as for Shuckle's ratings, this is where I'm at. For fun factor, I'd give it a 6 out of 10. The idea of a deck that can set up multiple prize turns is always fun, but this one needs a lot to go right in order for it to actually happen. For flow factor, I'd give it a 3 out of 10, considering how it bricked for the entire last match. And for win equity, I'd say it's probably a 5 out of 10, giving today's deck an average score of 4.3. And lastly, it's time to throw it to the wheel to see which Pokemon I'll be building a deck around next time. Villain, one of my favorite Paldean Pokemon, and also one of my favorite cards. I can't wait to put it to the test next time on the 825 Deck Challenge.